Hello my friends, Sony A7R IV was released almost 5 years ago back in 2019. It was and frankly still is ahead of its time when it comes to its main purpose, capturing the world in incredible quality one frame at a time. Despite that the resolution is far from being the only improvement that the A7R IV brought over the A7R III, it is still a dedicated high-resolution camera. And it ended up being pretty much the last one before the category was transformed into master of all trades, hybrid high-resolution cameras, with the A7R V being the best representation. In this video we will take a look at the performance and the feature set of the A7R IVA specifically in 2024 context. I will try to explain why I prefer it over the A7R V, and maybe explain why you might want to consider getting one almost 5 years after the release. In case that you don't have the time to watch the whole video, I will say right away why I prefer the A7R IV for my specific use over the new generation of high-resolution cameras such as A7R V. It is simple and it is small. That's about it. It is designed to provide the best possible image quality that you can get with a full-frame camera at a slow to medium pace. It is not trying to be a high-speed camera and it is not trying to be an 8K cinema camera. That gives the A7R IV some advantages. The first one is that size. In comparison to the A7R V, it is significantly smaller. The differences in listed dimensions seem to be minor, but it adds up, and despite that the A7R V still offers incredible size to performance ratio, it is a noticeably more bulky camera. Body size to image quality ratio of the A7R IV is still among the best on the market. You have the power of a 61 megapixel full-frame sensor in a camera that is just 12.9 cm wide and weighs 665 grams, including a battery and SD card. Especially if you pair it with one of Sony's equally compact lenses, you can get a setup that is not that much larger than your average tourist camera. My A7R IV is actually an updated A version introduced in mid-2021, but I will talk about that later. I've been using it for 2.5 years and it still looks as good as new. I was taking a good care of it, but it has seen a lot of action, so I am very happy with the build quality. Unlike the base A7 IV, it uses a full magnesium frame, so it feels more solid. I have tested the weather sealing to a reasonable extent and it has held up with no issues. The main highlight of the A7R IV is the 61 megapixel backside illuminated full-frame sensor. 5 years later, it is still unbeaten when it comes to the pure image quality that you can get out of a full-frame camera. The A7R V mostly uses the same sensor. I have tested them side by side and the output is pretty much identical. 61 megapixels is obviously a huge resolution, so it is not surprising that it can capture immense amount of detail. This kind of resolution is mainly intended for the most demanding publishing methods. Those are mainly large format fine art prints and digital publishing over 8K. A very practical use of A7R IV's resolution is cropping. 61 megapixels give you huge headroom for recomposing. As I've explained before, high-resolution sensors do not have worse ISO performance after downsampling. It will perform the same as other Sony full-frame BSI sensors. The same applies to the dynamic range. Even in very challenging light conditions, I was always able to extract enough information from the RAWs without introducing too much noise. As long as you stay at relatively low ISO values, you should always have ample room for editing. The A7R IV uses the version of Sony's color science that went through all of major fixes and the colors are very accurate. The myth about bad Sony colors is finally dying away, but I still have to say that there is nothing to be worried about here. Having said that, some users have claimed that the 2021 A version has some uncredited improvements to the color output, so there might be a slight difference between the original and the A version. Regarding the autofocus, the A7R IV has 567 phase detection and obligatory 425 contrast detection points. It is not the latest autofocus system from Sony, but it still performs great even by today's standards. Here again, I have to say that some users claim uncredited autofocus improvements with the A version. In usual situations, it works with absolutely no issues. The focus acquisition is basically instant and the accuracy has never been a problem. It is quite difficult to see the difference between the A7R IV and the cameras with the latest 759-point system unless you are doing something really extreme. Even the tracking is very solid and I am able to get perfect hit rate in my standard testing. The eye autofocus is particularly impressive. It works great with humans and various animals. It doesn't have the bird eye AF though. Real-time eye AF also works great in video. It is not a new feature, but in my opinion still very impressive 5 years later. The autofocus in video also works great. Unlike the A7 IV, it only has 3 speed settings and 2 responsiveness settings, but that is completely sufficient. There is no hunting at all, and the speed and the responsiveness depends on the settings. Touch tracking also works very well, which is a big improvement over older Sony cameras. Overall, I am still very happy with the autofocus. I don't really feel like I am missing anything in comparison to my A7 IV, for example. The in-body image stabilization is one of the areas where we have seen a pretty huge improvement in the latest generation. The IBIS in the A7R IV is rated for 5.5 stops and it is very useful. It is pretty much a requirement for this kind of resolution. At 24mm I am able to go down to about 1/5 of a second without seeing a decrease in sharpness at 100% magnification. The A7R V can go much further though. The A7R IV IBIS also works really well in video. It is roughly as good as the A7 IV. It is good enough for static shots up to about 70mm, maybe even more, for pointing the camera around and that kind of stuff. The most noticeable difference is that the A7R V IBIS works really well for walking, which is definitely not the case with the A7R IV. The video specifications are probably an area where we can see the biggest difference between the A7R IV and the latest generation of high-resolution cameras. The A7R IV can shoot nice 4K video up to 30p with no crop. It probably uses a combination of downsampling and pixel binning to do that, so it actually captures a very solid amount of detail. The A7R V actually does the same thing. You can also shoot fully downsampled video in Super 35 or APS-C mode, and in that case you will basically get a 6700 level of detail. The selection of video codecs is very simple. It can shoot 8-bit 420 at 100 megabits per second, which is basically A7 III level of video capabilities. 4K 60p is not available. If you want to shoot log, the A7R IV is not suitable. You really need 10-bit footage to do that in a meaningful way. The bottom line is that if you are a photographer and you also want to shoot some nice 4K video for YouTube or something like that, the A7R IV is more than good enough for that. If you want a camera specifically for video, there are much better choices than the A7R IV. If you want that 61 megapixel resolution and you are also serious about the video, the A7R V with its 8K capabilities, 10-bit, and full-size HDMI might be a good choice. I've talked more about that in my A7R V review, which will be linked in the description. Sony's full-frame cameras have been using mostly the same controls layout since 2017, and I would say that by now most people agree that it is a good layout. The A7R IV has larger grip than the previous generation, but a little bit smaller than the A7R V. I am very happy with it, it is well shaped and the size should be fine for most users. The A7R IV offers 3 command dials, joystick, and 12 logically positioned customizable buttons. The AF1 button is in the right place and the 2 buttons on the top of the camera are easy to reach. The buttons are raised and more tactile, which is a nice upgrade. Probably the biggest change in controls that came after the A7R IV are separate stills and video modes. I'm a huge fan of this solution, but I don't miss it on the A7R IV. The reason for that is that the video settings on the A7R IV are not very complex, so there is no need to change many settings between the stills and video, if any at all. And the same thing basically applies to the menu system. I think that the A7R IV was technically the last camera to be released with Sony's old menu system. By today's standards, it is not a good menu system. There is no way around saying that, but it doesn't really matter. The only time that I ever use the main menu is when I need to format an SD card. All other things that you need to change on the go can basically be assigned to custom buttons or in the worst case to the function menu. The main menu would be an issue if the A7R IV was a more complex hybrid camera with complicated video settings. For the usual high-resolution camera tasks, I don't really mind it. The two areas where the A7R IV is not outdated at all is the electronic viewfinder and the display. The A version uses 2.36 million dot 3-inch display. This is still one of the best displays on the market. The only display that surpasses it is a 3.2-inch 2.36 million dot display that you can find on the A7R V, for example. This display is extremely sharp, very color accurate, and the brightness is more than sufficient in pretty much any condition. Also worth mentioning is that the display uses a good old tilting mechanism. The A7R V uses the new hybrid mechanism, which is relatively thin and objectively the best option for all-round use. As I've explained in the beginning of the video, I appreciate a certain degree of simplicity, and the simple tilting screen is still my personal choice. The electronic viewfinder uses 5.67 million dot panel, which is still the second best that you can get. 9.44 million dot EVF, which again can be found in the A7R V, is even more impressive, but the real-world benefits of that EVF in comparison to 5.76 million dot unit are not that noticeable. 0.78 times magnification is in my opinion the best choice. It is also very bright and generally a joy to use. The battery life is one more area where the A7R IV benefits from its relative simplicity. The CPAR rating is 660 shots with the electronic viewfinder. That is 130 more than the A7R V and an excellent battery life overall. It uses NP-FZ100 batteries, which have been around for a while. If you maybe have some old batteries that you bought with your A7R III back in 2017, their health might not be in ideal condition, which might affect the battery life. So these were my thoughts about the A7R IV in 2024. The biggest takeaway, in my opinion, is that if you use it for its main purpose, which is slow to medium pace high-resolution photography, it will still do an outstanding job even by 2024 standards. The image quality is still the best that you can get with a full-frame camera. It hasn't been surpassed in that regard. The simplicity of the A7R IV also brings some advantages. It is smaller, lighter, and importantly simpler in comparison to new high-resolution cameras. There are basically just two areas where the A7R IVA feels outdated. The first one is the user interface, but that is not that big of an issue in this specific case. The second area are video specifications, which are below average by today's standards. The A7R IVA is definitely not the best hybrid camera. I would only recommend it for a very photography-heavy hybrid use. But the thing is that not everybody is a hybrid user. If you are looking for a camera for landscapes, portraits, or fine art photography, the A7R IVA is still an excellent choice. So that's it for this video, thank you for watching, I hope that you liked this video and that you have found it to be useful. Stay tuned for more videos and maybe consider subscribing if you don't want to miss my future content. I appreciate your feedback in form of thumbs up or thumbs down. If you would like to ask anything or share opinion, please do so in the comment section, and see you next time.